Good morning. I'm Terence Allmark, Business Development Manager at UKTelehealthcare. As we wait for final delegates to join us this morning, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join today's digital forum. This forum is dedicated to the Voice over Internet Protocol panel discussion. Following on from the successful IP session that we held in March, UKTelehealthcare's partner, Tech's Advisory Director and founder Steve Smith has agreed to preside over today's event. We would like to say thank you to Steve for his continued support. Also, thank you for those who have submitted questions. I would encourage you to continue to submit your questions today using the chat feature. And when you do submit your questions, if you can address them to both the participants and the attendees. In this way, everybody can be following the conversation and see the questions that you are raising. All the questions that we will receive today, we will record and pass on to participants. That's in case we don't, as we have got a large panel today, as we might not finish and go through all the questions submitted. A full recording of the event will be available on the UKTelehealthcare website following today's event. To share today's event, please use the @UKTHC News or #Tex. At the end of today's session, there will be some final closing remarks from the Managing Director, Jerry Allmark of UKTelehealthcare. I think we need to now, I can see we've got the majority of attendees and delegates joined. So I think we need to start the proceedings. If I could ask all panelists to only turn on their videos, please. And could I ask Steve Smith, and I can see your videos on, could you start your mic as well, please? And I'd like to hand over to Steve Smith, who is the Director and Founder of Tech's Advisory. Thank you, Steve.
No problem. Thanks, Terence. Good morning, everybody. It's a bit unnerving when you can't see yourself on one of these screens. I'm assuming everybody can see myself. So just some opening observations. First of all, welcome to the All IP Digital Forum. And more specifically, this panel discussion, which you never know might become a panel debate as well. Due to the level of interest in this area, you'll notice obviously this session is much longer than normal, so we've extended that to 2 hours. That will hopefully provide sufficient time for us all to gain a good degree of clarification around IT and an understanding of where we're all going in relation to the digital upgrade. As you can probably see from the introduction by Terence, we have an incredibly strong panel at today's event. And the panel represents really pretty much a good deal of the knowledge and expertise that exists within our sector. The panelists cover a wide range of disciplines. This ranges from device suppliers, the Tunsil, the Grams, etc. It includes regulatory representatives, users to consumer representatives, mobile SIM providers, telecom providers, the CPEs, and even NHS representation, which is a fantastic collection. And if we can't, or if that panel can't answer your question, then it may well not be worth asking. As the panel is quite large, with 16 members, including plus myself, I will not provide the normal courtesy of introductions. Clearly, that would take some time. So I'll just ask the panel to provide a very brief view as to who they are when answering the first question. Obviously, there'll be no need to give that after each question. As a number of the questions can be seen from different perspectives, it's more than likely that I will actually invite multiple people in to answer. So perhaps somebody from the device side, somebody from the network side, perhaps somebody from the regulatory side, to give a slightly different perspective, all relevant to the questions that's been asked. I would like, as Terence said, to invite attendees to ask questions via the chat facility. I will desperately try to incorporate those, but it is a little bit like herding cats with such a large group. So please bear with me. And if I don't get around to answering the question at this session, that would be great feedback for us for the next time round. So if we don't get it this time, almost certainly we'll get to you next time round. Just a personal big thank you to all the panelists that have agreed to come on board, and perhaps an even bigger thank you for those of you that are attending today. So without further ado, let's crack on and let's get into the first question. So this is a fairly broad question, and it's a one that's aimed specifically at a chap called Ronan Bunting, and Ronan will in a moment or two give you a little bit of his background. But this really relates to the Republic of Ireland rather than the rest of the United Kingdom. And what I'm keen to understand, and I think a number of us are keen to understand, is what is happening in the Republic of Ireland in respect to digitalization. Are you ahead? Are you behind? Are you running a parallel process? Particularly if you're slightly ahead, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced, Ronan, in the rollout of the digital process?
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. If you don't mind, Steve, if I could maybe just ask Richard Bailey to perhaps give a little bit of background from his perspective, Richard, if that's okay, and then I'll jump in.
Yeah. Is that okay, Steve? So yeah, thanks, Steve. My name is Richard Bailey, and I'm the country manager for the UK and Ireland for Telealarm. So based on the market engagement from the likes of Ofcom and BT in 2017, we're at the midway point of the analog to digital migration timeline. We're 4 years in, and we've seen a change where customers are purchasing digital telecare devices, which is great news. The majority of customers are opting for alarm units with mobile connectivity. My concern is that although the devices are digitally ready, we see that many of them are still being used with analog protocols over mobile networks. And the reason for this is that many of the UK monitoring centres are not able or still not able to take IP calls such as Scape or TS50134. We know from experience that analog tone protocols are slightly, they're unreliable over mobile networks. And we believe that the problems that we're encountering, such as redial attempts and calls taking a long time to get through to the monitoring centre, will get worse over time. The solution is to upgrade the monitoring centres to IP as soon as possible and get the digitally ready devices working in the way that they were designed, which is using Scape or the TS protocol. So I had a chat with Jerry before some time ago and asked if we could get Ronan on to share their experiences in Ireland using digital telecare devices on analog protocols, but also their transition to digital using Scape and IP protocol. So that's the sort of context behind Ronan joining. Over to you, Ronan.
Great. Thanks a million, Richard. So Ronan Bunting from Task Community Care. Just very quickly, we're a national telecare provider in Ireland, operating for about 40 plus years. Just to give a little bit of background to our experience with the transition from analog to digital. Following, there's a governmental grant available for people over the age of 65 here in the Irish Republic for telecare devices. And following the financial crash around 2008, our government started to roll back on various supports that were provided to the elderly. Over the coming years, probably around 2013, the government rolled back on the telephone allowance. A telephone allowance was available for anyone over 65 to enable them to have a fixed line system within their home. When this happened, there was, I suppose, a natural shift from the conventional analog telecare systems. People were doing away with their phone lines and they needed an alternative. We then started in greater numbers providing GSM alarm systems to our clients. And at that time, the units would work perfectly over analog protocols. And with a SIM card in the unit, the client, if and when required, would press their pendant. The alarm system would ring into the control center, as we all know, and everything was perfect. Somewhere around late 2016, 2017, we noticed a change in the networks. What we noticed was we were getting reports that people's alarm units, without warning, were in a lot of cases over dialing, for example. So the client would press their button, it would fail in the first attempt, it may ring over to the second or third attempt, and in some occasions the alarm units actually failed to make connectivity with the monitoring centers. So obviously this was a big problem, as we can all understand in this industry. Through swift action from, I suppose, our part and our suppliers, Telealarm, we needed to identify what actually the problem was with. And of course, you go through the usual problem solving steps to see, firstly, is it maybe an equipment problem or what the case might be. But very quickly, we realized that there was actually a change taking place in the mobile networks in Ireland. Okay. And we found, particularly in clusters, batches of alarm units in geographical areas that would encounter difficulties. Through communication with the various telephone providers, we then established, look, there's a problem here with analog signals and analog protocols over GSM. From our perspective, we had two things to do. We needed to upgrade our monitoring center, and we put a digital upgrade to the monitoring center that enabled us to answer IP calls over Skype and other protocols such as RBIP. In conjunction with that, we needed to reconfigure the alarm equipment in the field. And we were lucky, I suppose, in some respects, we didn't have that many. But over a period of time, we could reconfigure the alarm systems onto a digital protocol. So at one end, the client had the GSM alarm now programmed and operating over digital. And we had the alarm receiving center, which was compatible with bringing the alarm units together. Not a pleasant experience, I suppose, when you see reports of problems in numbers coming in. But from our perspective, it was a reasonably painless exercise once we could identify what the problem was and get all hands on deck to implement the digital protocols. That was probably late 2016, early 2017 when we got that done. And I suppose on a positive side, we're now 4 years later, we don't have any failures on our GSM units. The problem that we had at that time is a thing now of the past, thankfully. And I'm sure just from an Irish perspective and somebody that's gone through, and a business that has gone through this transition, it can be quite daunting. But I suppose, look, time is of the essence, and time is with people here to actually look at the options and see what options best fit their business. We have over 10,000 GSM alarms in the field today, and we don't have problems with them. They're very, very reliable. And I suppose the discussion that's now happening this morning for us, thankfully, is a thing in the past. But it's not something, I think, if I was a UK business, I certainly wouldn't be shying away from it. I'd be looking at whatever options are available. And as I said, time is with you at this point. I think it's 4 years to 2025. But, moving away slightly, I don't want to take up too much time, and apologies, but from a business perspective and from a cost perspective, there's so many advantages to the digitalization process from a telecare perspective. And from a telecare, we're both a telecare installation company and a monitoring provider. From the digital side of things, gone are the days of unnecessary call outs to people's homes to maybe program an additional piece of equipment, or to reconfigure a piece of equipment to a different location. It's all done now over the cloud and with software. So you can actually sit in your monitoring center and reconfigure alarm equipment, saving you the need to send out installation crews to change features of an alarm unit. And units can be done in batches. You know, if you wanted to update certain features of equipment, it can be done in batches of several hundred units. So from a business perspective, it's a win-win. And I certainly don't think it's something that you know, people should be too concerned about. Because, as I said, time is certainly with you. I think that's a brief overview.
Okay, thanks. That's great, Ronan. Just a thought here, because I think your experience is difficulty with DTMF transmission over mobile, and therefore moving to IP. Is that correct? Sorry, Ronan.
Absolutely, Steve. Yes.
Oh, okay. Could I take a view from both Douglas and Max from Mobius and CSL on this, perhaps starting with yourself, Douglas, as to the reliability in terms of transmitting DTMF signaling via the mobile network? Because to me, that is not fully digital. It's using the digital carrier to carry an analog protocol. Is there any danger that the quality around that, in other words, I guess the quality of the DTMF transmission over mobile, will be impacted in any way over time, in the same way, obviously, DTMF struggles to transit an IP network?
So you've got exactly the same thing, Steve. Sorry, Douglas Gilmer. I'm the MD of Mobius Networks. It's high security, high availability airtime for around the world, but mostly the UK. So you've got exactly the same situation where you're taking a very dense analog signal and then converting it into a digital signal and possibly reconverting it back, and that may happen a couple of times as the data goes through the network. So what you'll see is a degradation. It's the old bring 4 and 6pence and we're going to a dance. And that's the kind of thing that happens with the DTMF. The signal, the information gets corrupt. And the reason why you've seen that transition, that Ronan saw that transition, is because you've switched from a system that largely supported what was called CSD, circuit switch data, which is exactly the same technology as DTMF. It's that transferring information by sound, by making the old fax noises. And as the mobile networks have shifted away from an analog system, supporting an analog system, to an all digital system, the conversion rates have become more aggressive. There's more chance of the data being converted into digital, and we're now really sitting in an all digital system. So we have CSD SIMs available. I'm sure CSL do as well, but they're now a specific form. They're now a specific tariff. They're not the standard SIMs that any network would sell or support. So you're in a situation now where using DTMF becomes difficult. You start to see failures, and you'll see more and more failures as time progresses.
This is quite frightening as an observation for the sector, Douglas, because I think, and forgive me if I'm interpreting this incorrectly, but you've got traditional analog, which I think we all understand, an analog telephone line with an analog device. We are moving to an IP world with a IP alarm device on an IP network, packet switching. So that's true IP end to end. So it will transmit as IP or transceive as IP, be received at the call center as IP, and communicate in that way, typically with SCAPE or similar protocol. But what we're talking about is this middle ground. And what I'm concerned about on behalf of commissioners, it is an open question, I guess, is can many commissioners have recently, i.e. in the last 2 years, bought mobile-based devices believing they're buying an IP or a fully digitally enabled device, when in fact, really all they're doing is transmitting good old-fashioned analog DTMF over a digital carrier. So is that the three sort of conditions, as it were?
I can't speak for the hardware manufacturers. Certainly, I don't know if Max, there you go, Richard's hand up. But certainly, when you've got that situation where you've got it starts off as an analog signal, It's then converted into a digital signal on the fly and may then be converted back and reconverted it. Because remember, most of us now are using roaming SIMs of some form. So you have the SIM, the device, you have the network, local network it attaches to, O2 or Merlin in Ireland or whatever. And then that signal, digital signal, then gets reconverted back out to analog at the far end. And each time in that conversion process, there's loss. And DTMF is a particularly dense, it's a very clever way of getting a huge amount of information to a very short space of time. So that in itself, that density, the high speed nature of it, actually works against it when it comes to analog conversion.
Okay, thanks for that, Douglas. I'll come just in a second, Richard, but Max, observations from your perspective?
Yeah, so firstly, good morning, everyone. Hi, my name's Max Stevens. I'm Key Account Manager at IoT for CSL. CSL provide connectivity to a number of manufacturers of digital and analog GSM alarms in this space. We actually work with Task as well. Agree with Douglas. So the problem that you've got is the bit in the middle is already being upgraded to digital. And I think just to sort of add on to what Douglas has said. So firstly, although maybe we see this issue more with mobile working in the analog world, it's not an exclusively mobile problem. So PSTN is having the same issue. It's maybe not having the issue as much, and maybe BT and the other CPs might be able to confirm why that is. Maybe it's that they're slightly further behind in terms of upgrading that piece in the middle, or if it's just the fact that, like Douglas says, they're roaming SIMs, they're also going abroad, there's an extra step. But we do see this with PSTN or landlines as well as mobile. And I think also it's key to remember that we're seeing this issue already. I think 2025 is a bit of a red herring almost in a way. 2025 is an end date, not a start date. And that bit in the middle is already being upgraded. Ireland isn't completely digital today, but they were already seeing this issue as early as 2016, 2017. That's because bits of that infrastructure in the middle were being upgraded. And it's where that DTMF signal is switching from analog to digital and then back to analog. And then that's where you then see where those handshakes have to be absolutely perfect. Any discrepancy in the DTMF tones that reach the monitoring sensor compared to what leaves the unit means that DTMF fails, and that's where you get the redials and the call fails and stuff like that. So I think it's just important for us to remember that we can't wait until 2025, not least because we can't obviously swap everything out in 12 months, but also these issues exist today. And that's why, like Ronan says, one of the key things is actually the monitoring sensor as well, because although you can start to make the problem smaller by putting out digital ready or hybrid devices, which can work digitally, but will work in an analog way until your monitoring sensor is ready, the only way that you can ultimately get rid of these failures completely is going to a pure end-to-end digital solution.
No, that's great, Max. Thank you. So I think what you're saying is, just if I slightly swap your words around, just because you've upgraded to a digital solution, get my words right, to a mobile-based solution, doesn't necessarily mean you've left the digital problem behind. Because if you're using DTMF tone signaling into your analog control center, you haven't got a digital upgrade, and you're going to have to move to a full IP solution at some point. And I guess some of those devices, we'll come back to manufacturers a little later, but I guess some of those devices are capable of working both as an analog digital and as a SCAPE or IP device, but some of them may not be able to support SCAPE. So I think it's probably an important question for a commissioner to look in terms of his or her own database of equipment and determine, is my equipment capable of operating both as IP as well as pseudo digital, or will I need to replace all those digital devices I may have only, or mobile devices that I may have only bought a little while ago to be IP compatible? Richard, you've got your hand up. Please feel free.
It was just to, I think Max answered the question. Is basically the digital units will have an IP capability over fixed line or mobile, which would be escape implementation, but it also has that analog over mobile connectivity. So it would send an analog call over a GSM with DTMF tones. So yeah, Max answered that for me.
Okay, this is quite a hot question, clearly. Anne-Marie's asked a question to Ronan, but I think you might be able to answer it, Richard, which is what type of GSM are you using? I hope you don't mind, Ronan, but if you can answer that.
So these are the Telealarm TA74 GSM units.
Okay, thank you for that. I see some other hands up, so if I can find them. Saeed, did you have your hand up or have you put it down?
No, yeah, I just wanted to make one point. We talk about SCAPE, but if we actually look at the IP protocol that's standardized across Europe, it's TS50134-9, which is backwardly compatible to SCAPE, but it causes a lot of confusion for commissioners because SCAPE is a legacy protocol. It was around 4 or 5 years ago. It's been superseded because it doesn't meet the security needs of the modern IP world. And as people have mentioned, that a lot of digital devices are being sold today, configured for analog, but they are capable of being switched over to digital. And it's one of those things that when people are looking to procure equipment, they should always focus on that future proofing of the equipment they're purchasing.
No, that's a very, very good point. And I apologize for using SCAPE. It's a bit more catchy than whatever it was you just said in terms of that standard. We'll have to think of a short form version, I think. Is it BS
SCAPE
standard?
Plus, but it's called TS50134-9. And sorry, I've not introduced myself either, but I'll wait till I get a proper question.
Please do now, Saeed.
Yeah, I'm Saeed Chowdhury. I'm the R&D manager for Legrand. Legrand consists of the brands that people might know as John Tech, Time Tech, Neat, and Intervox. We're a pan-European manufacturer of alarm equipment and monitoring sensors. So we kind of look at the piece from both perspectives.
Excellent. And having somebody from our R&D is going to be really helpful today. So I'm sure we'll pester you with other questions as we go through. But I think it's perhaps time to move on. So question 2, kindly put forward by Anne Ogilvie of Calderdale NBC, and hopefully you're on this call, Anne. But the question is, how ready are we for the analog to digital switch in 2025? Now, it's a huge, broad question, so we won't dwell on it too much, but I'll certainly pull a few people in. Sean of Chubb, could you kick off with an answer to that one, please?
As you said, it's a broad question, Steve. So being ready for digital starts with the device itself that you're going to be installing into the property. So from a point of view of Chubb, yes, we do have a dispersed alarm unit, which is 4G cellular capability, with also fall over into Ethernet, and also will still provide a PSTN connection should it be needed. So for those organizations that are going through that sort of transition period where they still have PSTN connections into a contact center, then yeah, this is it's a transitional device which will cover that sort of time period. However, as the conversation has gone through this morning, you then need a contact center which is digitally ready and can actually accept IP. And that's where the problem is occurring, because you're having customers out there who are equipment's being installed in there, which is a digital piece of equipment, but they're now trying to get it to operate over a GSM network because they haven't got a PSTN link. So for the customers out there, it's confusing because what does digital mean? You know, the connectivity side of it. Is it Ethernet? Is it cellular? From the point of view of what's happened in the past, if you just draw upon the record of what happened in Sweden, they went through this whole process back in 2007, 2008. And their output from that was it has to be a cellular connection. So with a cellular connection, you then got the question, well, is it 2G, 3G, 4G? Because we're all selling different devices on that basis. And to answer or to build upon the point of Saeed there about future-proofing, then future-proofing would deem that you go 4G unit. Yep, 2G is around, 3G is still here. 3G will probably go mid this decade. 2G will probably run out to the end of the decade. However, cellular networks supporting 2G don't expect them to be responsive as time goes on because this is a legacy system. And I saw it recently. A couple of guys around the table probably draw upon this. Tele2, who are a base network SIM provider, they went down in weekend 29th of May. And the time it took to get back up on 4G was a lot faster than it took back to get up on 2G. And that's purely because the focus is going to be on 4G going forwards. So in terms of being able to supply equipment, then, yep, from a point of view of Chubb, we do have a full digital dispersal alarm unit, as we also have a digital ward and call system as well. We also have our own contact center software, which is also digitally enabled. We work with Ronan over in Ireland and also a number of other companies around the UK on this. Falkirk in Scotland was able to quote themselves as the first full digital end-to-end business in Scotland as a following on from the work we did in conjunction with Doro to ensure that they did. Doro supplied the equipment in that case in terms of the dispersal alarm. We were able to supply the contact center platform, and then working with CSL, I believe, we were able to complete the loop and offer a full digital system in Scotland. So there are organizations out there who have moved a lot faster and are now fully end-to-end digital. Most of them seem to be going north of the border because Scotland always seems to be ahead of the curve on this. The UK needs to follow. So, in a roundabout sort of way to answer the question, are we ready? Yep. Have we proven? Yep. We're just waiting for people south of the border to really get moving on this now. And the worry is that time is ticking here, and there's a number of imperatives. One is just the amount of hardware that needs to be switched out in the field, which every day that passes by, that just becomes more of a challenge. And it's not from the point up till recently, I wouldn't say it wasn't from the point of view of the suppliers, because we find a way to supply the equipment. However, we've now got a perfect storm of microprocessor and 4G chipsets causing problems across the board, which could restrict supply moving forward. But I think the biggest challenge is going to be the actual physical, somebody going out there and swapping over an analog piece of kit for a digital piece of kit. The longer you leave it, the more of a challenge that is going to be for each of these organizations.
I'll ask others to contribute as well, Sean, but yep. is really yes or no answer. Is there a real danger here that instead of doing this as a project where you're doing 20% a year over a 5-year period, we're sort of doing 10%, and suddenly we're going to end up with a huge backloaded requirement that the industry, either from a device point of view or a physical install it point of view, is going to be really, really struggling if too many commissioners leave this process too late in the cycle. And around that, I'm particularly personally concerned about sheltered housing. I think as long as commissioners don't commission new analog devices, then over a 4 or 5 year period, because of natural churn, that to some degree should take care of itself. Mm-hmm. But I recognize sheltered housing typically lasts 20, 30, 40 years even. And if you went on that duty cycle or replacement cycle, we'd never do it in time. But I don't sense we're upgrading assisted living sheltered housing as quickly as we are individual living dispersed alarm units.
I would say that from what I see of dispersed alarm units, I still have customers out there who are buying analog or wanting to buy analog alarm units, which I cannot seriously get my head around, that people would invest in equipment now, which is a capital investment. Yes, it's, let's use figures, £100 a pop, as opposed to heading towards £200 for digital. So it meets a short-term budgetary constraint. and just ease because we know what it is and we've used it before, but you're just putting off the inevitable and you're burning money that really should be invested within new digital equipment.
Okay, great observation. Thank you, Sean. I'm going to ask David Halliday. David, whether you have any observations to the question of how ready are we for this switchover in 2025?
Thank you, Steve. So my name's David Halliday. I run an organisation called the OTA. It's the Office of Telecommunication Adjudicator. And my sphere of interest is with all the communication providers. And obviously we're driven by the closure of the PSTN plus the onward march or mobile fibre networks. How ready are we? I mean, that's from the perspective outside of the telecare community. This is something that obviously we've been worrying about for some time, concerning ourselves about how do we make the links to a community of interest, which is not normally registered, recognised or readily understood by the communications providers. I'm quite interested in the discussions around GSM. I think that sounds to be sensible and a good way forward. I also recognise that there is huge confusions over the words digital, IP, Ethernet, analog, etc., because they're all variants. And for someone like myself who's been in the industry probably as long as most people on this call, digital has been with us for about 40 years. In one form or another. So we've had it there. And I think there's a big difference and distinction between digital and IP. And I think the real challenges come in where we're talking about moving to a proper IP environment. So for us, it's how we trigger a communication with the consumer to say, you know, are you interested, or you have contacted a CP to say, I am interested in upgrading. The big question is, do you know if your support services are ready? And it's interesting listening to this discussion around how do you upgrade all those units. What strikes me is if you ask a consumer, are you ready? I'm not sure how they would answer. Unless through that process of upgrading and changing, we've got maybe some sort of big tick green sticker or something you can put on a device going, if you see a green sticker, you're okay. If you don't, you can't. So for me, there's still a bit of a breakdown between communication readiness and upgrades and the processes that we're going through, the consumer in the middle, and then all of the support services, of which there's a myriad of different guises there. And how do we know the consumer has been readied by that myriad of services? And in the end, the communication provider only talks to the customer and really is wholly dependent. So my concern is this industry ensuring that their customers are aware that they're ready? What is the process? What is the upgrade? Or are we going to have a situation whereby they will never know whether they're ready, and we have to continuously refer people to their suppliers to say, please go and check. And when on that basis, then you may be able to upgrade. So Steve, that's where my worry is in that whole dialogue. It's great to hear about all the technology. It's interesting to hear the Irish experience. I think GSM does appear to be a significant way forward, but not everywhere has a mobile signal. In the end, somewhere you do need physical connectivity. It might be a fiber network, it might be a radio network, it might be a variant of analog, which is basically fiber to the cabinet and then analog to the home, which effectively runs as a broadband network. So all of those variants we've got to face up to. So sorry, very lengthy answer, Steve, but my worry is that link between CP's customers and the suppliers, and ensuring the suppliers make sure their customers know what position they're in, so when they're looking at their communication needs, they know what to do next.
I think the points are well made, David, and it's a perspective I hadn't necessarily thought about. You know, as a sector, we're so focused on alarm devices, monitoring centres, as an industry, absolutely doing our best to support elderly, vulnerable users. But of course, those very same elderly, vulnerable users are users of telephones, and probably a higher percentage use fixed line rather than mobile as the age profile goes up. And it's a really interesting point to say, you know, how much of a culture shock is it going to be when one of the CPs turns up to take an analog line and convert it into an IP service, and suddenly the traditional telephone, the analog telephone, that that elderly person's had for perhaps a number of years and very comfortable with is suddenly swapped with a DECT phone, and perhaps the answer machine they've been using for years isn't going to work either. So it's an interesting question to say, is there a much broader communication issue with those service users who are typically vulnerable elderly adults that goes way beyond just the telecare service? If I may bring in a representative of Ofcom, we've got Elisa and Tim. Perhaps one of you guys might like to pick this up. If you could perhaps agree between you which one will take that question.
I'm going to hand it over to Lisa to start the discussion on this.
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute.
It looks like you're in San Francisco.
Yes. I've not managed to do like some of my colleagues I see and change my whole background on the Zoom call. We use Teams traditionally, so I've slightly kind of had to choose the Zoom options there. The question is kind of how is industry ready? Well, I think from a regulatory perspective, what we've really been focused on is a number of things. The first of which is access to emergency calls. So we've got rules in place to make sure that consumers can continue to make emergency calls. We've issued guidance in relation to that as well, which obviously I see David and colleagues around will be well familiar with. We've also put guidance, we've also got obligations in place in relation to vulnerable customers. That includes treating them fairly and being able to identify those customers. We've set out our expectations that providers will help and provide assistance to their customers throughout the migration to all their customers. And in terms of what we do, we monitor progress. We have been working for a little while to raise awareness of IP migration to customers of those services in relation to communications providers. So those services that do use the current telephony network to provide a service that isn't a voice service, but indeed the telecare alarms. So that's kind of what our focus has been so far. There is a bit of a focus on how we're ready for a specific date. I think a good point made by one of my colleagues on the panel is that this is happening now. There are customers on IP services now. Those customers obviously have had to have a different solution, and that's going to continue over the following years. So we will be keeping an eye on how communications providers continue to migrate to IP and how they in particular help their customers through that transition. Tim, did you want to ask anything else?
Just a couple of things to add to that. The first, in the chat, I noticed a question: are telecare calls emergency calls? Well, they're not, I'm afraid. But I think there's a couple of things that you've mentioned that I just want to pick out. I think the first is that the other thing that Ofcom is doing is a lot of awareness within government departments. I mean, some of the communications that we're doing is not just to consumers, it is to make awareness across all the departments and across the industries that may be affected, to raise that awareness and give them some guidance as to how to engage with their communication providers, etc., down that chain. So there's communications providers and the device manufacturers at the bottom of the chain, kind of making awareness perhaps at the kind of the local level, but we're trying to get in at the top and make awareness at the kind of the high level, so that they kind of meet in the middle somewhere, and so the awareness is all through. And I think on the time scales, I think there's whilst Elisa's correct to say yes, this is happening now, it could well be that a lot of customers who are identified of having devices, telecare devices, will be not migrated initially, and they'll be put kind of on a later schedule, which could well be that, as to the point that's made earlier, that there'll be a back-end loaded scramble to get a lot of people all migrated all at the same time in the last couple of years or months. So I think that's kind of a concern that when the migration takes place, while there is a steady increase in the number of people who get migrated, that the really tricky, complicated consumers may end up being waiting till the end. But hopefully, some of the challenges and the complexities have been overcome. But nevertheless, there may be a lot of volume to do so in the time remaining. So that's the only kind of observations I'll make.
Tim, whilst I've got you on, there's another question that's been asked by a Bradley Cooper from Sutton, may well be Sutton Housing. How do local authorities gain telephone provider lookup so they can check the impact of an upgrade and safeguard those residents? I'm not sure whether that's an Ofcom question or more of a CP stroke OpenReach question. So how do they gain telephone provider lookup so they can check the impact of an upgrade?
I'm not sure what that question is asking, so I'm going to defer to my communication providers to start with, and I might chip in later if there's a bit of clarity as to how Ofcom can help.
Okay, John Livermore, is that anything you feel able to contribute to in terms of answering that? Telephone provider lookup.
Thanks, Steve. Let's make a comment. So I'm John Livermore. I work for OpenReach as the industry engagement manager. So traditionally, of course, well, not traditionally, actually, the business model is that OpenReach sell to communications providers, and some of our customers and colleagues on here today from TalkTalk and from BT. But my role is to reach beyond those into industries like telecare, alarms, critical national infrastructure, make sure that the education is out there of what all IP means, what digital means, all the kind of stuff that David from the OTA referred to earlier. It's pretty worthwhile. I spend a lot of time kind of clarifying this, and this is no bad thing, but it's important for people to understand the difference. There seems to be a mindset still that an exchange is going to be upgraded. It's going to happen at one weekend, and everyone's going to be moved over to all IP, and that's not what's happening. So today in the UK, there are 5,500 exchanges, and in those 5,500 exchanges, about 95% already have access to fibre to the cabinet, also known as SOGEA, which effectively is a part copper, part fibre telephone line. And effectively, the digital bit, if you like, is your router. I spend a lot of time speaking to people about routers and saying, just remember, if you take nothing away from any presentation I do, please take away this one thought, that everything in the world in future for the UK is going to go through router, whether that's voice over IP, whether that's all of your analog devices that you've got today. If you want them to work going forward, it has to go through router. So there isn't going to be some kind of list that says this exchange moves over this day, everybody moves over at the same time. There's also fibre to the premises that's out there. About 5.2 million premises are covered, and you've seen that OpenReach have a commitment to try and get to 25 million premises by the year 2026. But actually, it's true to say that even if we didn't put another piece of fibre in the ground, the UK could move over tomorrow to all IP through the FTTC SOGEA product. So actually, the timing will be down to our colleagues and our friends in communications provider land. That means that communications providers, and I'll hand over to my colleagues there elsewhere in just a moment, but they will make the decision. So today you've got lots of adverts on TV, ultra fast, you're seeing all the ads, and communications providers are trying very hard to get us to move over voluntarily onto something that effectively gives up access to the PSTN equipment and exchange that's closing down at the end of 2025. And that's what this is all about. The whole thing is about closing down equipment that was put in the 80s, will close at the end of 2025. And as Max said, that's the end, that's not the beginning. So even now, communications providers are subtly contacting some customers. In some cases, it's because they have a certain router. In other cases, it's because of their setup, and moving them already over to what we know as all IP. As David said earlier, digital is a bit of a misnomer in a lot of this, because digital kind of means your router again. It's the digital signals that are going through your router. So ultimately, the end game will be we will all be on a router, whether that's at home, whether that's in a lift shaft, whether that's in telecare, whatever it is, everything's going to go through router, and the timing will be dependent on your communications provider. So today, it's all voluntary. Clearly, the numbers are still very high. 14 million lines need to be migrated by the year 2025. We've got a long way to go. That average is about 269, 270,000 lines a month from now to the end of 2025. That's not what we're seeing. Maybe we're seeing 10,000 a month, and we will get a bow wave without any doubt if we don't start to see some big migrations. So at some time in the next year or two, probably, we will start to see something along the line of bulk migration. I have no insight to that. And again, my communication provider colleagues may have some thoughts on that, but may not be able to share it because of commercial sensitivity. But we will be contacted, and we will get some kind of letter or an email or something from at some point saying, for you, you're my customer, and I'm going to move you over to this service on such and such a date, and this is what you need to do. And it might mean a new router, it might be your first router in the case of some of the customers we're talking about here, and that then raises all the issues that keep me awake at night, which is about who goes around that premises, who updates it, who plugs it in, Openreach on a position to touch third-party equipment. So a lot of what I've heard today about preemptive strikes is absolutely the right thing to do, because otherwise the situation is just going to happen. And I kind of beg people really to think about the customer experience. Think about your customer's experience, your client's experience in their homes, particularly for dispersed alarms. What is it they're going to find out from whom? It's probably going to get a letter. The letter will say on such and such a date this is happening. Will they understand it? Do they have dementia? Do they have issues because they even got arthritis? They can't unplug stuff from the wall socket and plug it over to the router, etc., etc., etc. So in terms of that, to finish kind of the question really, in terms of there is not a schedule that says this exchange goes over on this day. You've probably seen stop sell lists, and a stop sell list is about early withdrawal from selling the analog WLR product. So in September 2023, Openreach have said that there'll be a national stop sell. After that point, we don't sell any more analog lines or copper lines. They stop at the end of September 2023, where we've put a lot of full fibre in. We're bringing those dates forward in those exchange areas, but the exchanges aren't closing any earlier. They're still going to be 2025. The exchanges aren't closing at all. Effectively, it's just this equipment that's being made redundant at the end of 2025. But it's potentially the case that a customer, and I use this illustration pretty much every day, if you think of a typical road, number 3, 5, 7, 9, it could be that number 1 is with one CP, number 3 with another, and so on and so forth. Number 1 could get a letter this week, could be this month, could be this year. The next door neighbour might be 2024, depending on when that communication provider decides to do their move. So just be aware this is going to be piecemeal. And if you look after big organisations, and I do a lot with the NHS and things like that, I see Michael's on here from the NHS. Hi, Michael, I see you again. That's my concern there as well, because they may have 2, 3, 4, 5 CPs. They may get themselves all sorted out with one CP this year. Next year, they've got to do it all over again. So in summary, think about it in terms of it's a piecemeal approach. Every CP will do it at their own speed, and you're not going to get some big bang that happens in one period of time. So I've said enough, and my apologies went on a bit. Hopefully that was helpful. I don't know whether maybe Sodi and Phil from the 2 CPs on here want to add anything in terms of 2025 and the reach in this respect.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, John. Really interesting as always. I think if I'm interpreting your message correctly and trying to respond back to Bradley's note from Sutton, is there isn't a central database, there isn't a central plan that can be shared with the local authority to know that Mrs. Smith in Acacia Avenue is going to be upgraded in 3 weeks' time, and therefore we might need to do something with her alarm device. It's just, as you said, too piecemeal to achieve that. Yeah, I'm conscious of time, but just bringing people quickly in. Sodi, I'm not sure whether you're on the call still.
Yes, hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep, fine.
Great. No, thank you. And I'll be brief. I know David Christie's got his hand up from Virgin, so I think he's eager to respond as well. But no, you know, I appreciate it isn't an ideal situation, but just on that topic and the point that Bradley's raised, you know, as a communication provider, we've got millions of customers to migrate, and we're doing it in various ways. And what we're doing is, you know, initially targeting customers that have already got the right equipment. They need the least amount of intervention. to be migrated over to an IP voice service, and ours is, we're calling it digital voice, and that's customers that have already got our latest router, and we can just migrate them remotely. Now, what we are doing in terms of the customers that are classed as vulnerable, and I would expect a significant number of customers with telecare to fall into that category. We've developed we call our special services numbering tool, along with a couple of other communication providers as well, where we've gathered the numbers for alarm receiving centres, and we're using that data to hold off primarily migrating those customers at this stage. So we're trying to give them as much time as possible to allow the industry to talk to those customers, to put their roadmaps in place and upgrade them. Okay, so we're kind of, I say the risk is that we're back-ending, as been mentioned, but that process at the moment, that gets around the obvious GDPR issue, because we're not migrating customers on a geographic basis. We're doing them depending on their circumstances, but we are obviously, at this stage, as someone's mentioned already, not actively targeting those customers that we know have got telecare equipment. And indeed, if we send comms out and the customer has been missed and they're told they've got a telecare device, then we have the ability to obviously delay and pause their migration. I mean, if there's another way, if we can work better, I think it's still open to explore. But of course, we do have the GDPR issues in terms of us sharing data of our customers externally without their permission, and that's a challenge for everyone, I believe.
Okay. Dave Christine?
Yeah, hi Steve, thanks. So David Christie from Virgin Media. I work in their regulatory and public policy team. I've been advising on IP migration for several years. I think short answer to the original question is that there being enough done at the moment? No. If there was, we wouldn't need to have events like this with lots of people asking really good and relevant questions on it. But the more difficult question is, how do we achieve a really good way of getting everybody informed? There's no silver bullet on that. And I think it's worth just tracking back to the timing on this, as has been mentioned. The December 2025 date, that is a specific date related to when Openreach will no longer provide all of the old analog PSTN services, the WLR acronym that John mentioned. So the migration from traditional telephony to IP telephony is taking place already. Customers are already taking IP services from Virgin Media, from other providers, and that will continue from now through to 2025. Virgin Media will probably continue its migration into 2026, but there is a need, and I think this is an important point to make from the telephone or telco perspective. There is a need to migrate because the infrastructure, the PSTN infrastructure, is simply end of life. If you carried on trying to keep it going beyond 2025, it would become less reliable, it would become unreliable, and fundamentally these important services that need to be reliable would start falling away naturally. So there is the need to move on to this new technology. 2025 is not as early as some countries. Sweden's been mentioned as going already. Other countries in the EU are already migrated. So I think we need to be aware that there is a continuing migration from today, from earlier than today, through the next 4 to 5 years, and that's where we are.
Okay,
we need to ensure that both end users are aware, so our customers, whether they're elderly telecare users, are aware, but also associated industries, so social housing, local authorities, and that's the challenge: getting everybody up to a minimum level of information so that we can all work together on this to provide the best experience possible to end users. And I think, from Virgin's perspective, so we have a separate network to Openreach that John helps to run. We are looking to migrate our switches between this year and, say, around about 2026, so roughly aligned with the Openreach date. we will try and write, well, we will write to all of our customers when we choose to migrate a switch area. And what we're trying to do is ensure that anybody else who is interested in that event will also be written to. So we'll look at the postcodes, we'll write to local authorities in the postcode, we'll write to the MP, we'll let TSA, UK Telehealth know so that they can inform their members and try and generate that information a good few months before the migration process actually hits. There is no silver bullet, and we need to work together because otherwise people will be missed, and that is really what we don't want to achieve. We are as concerned as anybody on this call that people who have special services, as Sadie mentioned, are treated in the right way. So, fundamental message is, can we do more? Absolutely. We're willing to do more, willing to interact with local authorities, willing to interact with equipment manufacturers, but we need to get together on this.
Okay, Bradley just dropped a note to say that TSA asked alarm receiving centres to send the number to telecoms providers, and he's asking for a response to that sharing telephone data. This will enable us to, quote, support you to move more quickly. GDPR is not an issue for social care in this instance, as if the as the service ends, it's a safeguarding issue. So if the service ceases, then we're into safeguarding. Data can be shared to prevent harm, as in common law duty. So you're saying, is that still relevant for ARCs to send specific numbers through to the CPs?
Yeah, so what we did originally, Virgin and BT were running this individually, so it makes sense for there to be a centralized list, which is what the TSA's role is. What we can do is, when we've got the list of ARC numbers, if we're looking to migrate a switch, we'll run a search on which of our customers have called that number. So essentially, have any of our customers got an alarm system that's called an ARC in the last 6 months? We can then tailor the comms to those customers. You've got an alarm system. You need, if you are involved in a switch migration, you need to be speaking to your alarm provider as well. And that is difficult communication, because you have to get the tone right for the end user in that is being written to. But yes, that is how we can better communicate and send those tailored communications to those individuals. Where we do have more of a difficulty is if, say, we were, I'm sitting in an office in Hammersmith. So for the sake of argument, plucking an area from there, if we were migrating Hammersmith today, we would write to Hammersmith Local Authority. Hammersmith Local Authority might have, say, 1,000 people using telecare units that they would want to, but they wouldn't necessarily know which of those 1,000 people were on Virgin Media's network. Might be 200, might be 400, who knows? And so that's another challenge. How do we get our customer base across to the local authority? And there are some more GDPR issues there, so it's not straightforward as just sharing all the data straight away. But I think that's one area. For example, we could certainly do with that sort of communication when we speak to local authorities, get it better that way. And I see Bradley's agreed, so happy to do that.
Okay, that's great, David. And I don't want to miss yourself out, Phil, from Talk. Hi, Phil.
First one of the day. I'm sorry. So first of all, Talk are a little bit behind Virgin and BT in this, in that we've not launched our VoIP product yet. So I am getting lots of learning from David and Sodi, which is great. But from our point of view, a few points to make really, which have probably already been said. The big one is around stop sell. That stop sell is the date when people are not going to be able to buy an analog product any further. It doesn't affect ones that are already out there. So I think that's important. As John said earlier, there isn't a particular date when an exchange goes over. It could happen at any time. The ARC number situation. I think one of the issues we've had is that, as David said, the BT have asked ARCs for numbers, Virgin have asked for them, Talk have asked for them, and frankly, with 500 odd CPs out there potentially all asking ARCs the same question, they're going to forget who you sent it to and whatever. And I think this combined effort from I think it was the TSA and the OTA to get a central database of these numbers is going to be good going forward. And just from Talk's point of view, you know, we're not. When we get around to selling this product or to moving people, you know, we will have this discovery journey, as we say, when we speak to customers, just to make sure that we're not migrating somebody who's got a special piece of equipment. It's great in that respect, in that we think we're not going to sort of switch somebody and then find out the service doesn't work. The problem is, of course, as others have said, it just pushes that group further down the line, and eventually, you know, we're gonna have probably a backlog of these customers that we need to migrate. And the big challenge is then getting the likes of the CP, OpenReach, the telecare provider all to work together for all the reasons we've spoken of earlier about, you know, can the customer unplug their equipment, plug the new one in? So there's an awful lot to do. I suppose the one thing we've always said is, you know, if you've got, start planning now, even if you can't do it right at the moment, have a plan. Don't leave it to the last minute, because that's when the issues are going to come up. Okay,
that's great, Phil. Thank you very much. I'm going to change direction now. We've talked a lot about the sort of from the CP side. I've got a question here which really relates back to the device manufacturers. So a heads up, Steve Tope from Tunstall. I'll start with you on this one. The question from Dave Andrews at Hertfordshire Council is, what will be the expected cost impact replacing analog devices with digital solutions? I know that's quite a broad question, but do you mind kicking that off, Steve?
Thanks, Steve. So for those who maybe don't know me, Steve Tope, Strategic Business Development Director at Tunstall. I just really quickly, Steve, just wanted to go back to that previous point that Anne made in the how ready are we? I think quite a few of the guys, both Davids touched on it. I think there's a piece of work for industry more broadly to get a common set of terminology that everybody understands. So already on this topic today, we've had, is it IP? Do I call it digital? Is it SCAPE? Do I use TS 50134-9? So I think there's a piece of work there. And the other bit about the how ready are we, I think industry, and whether that's device manufacturers, telcos, mobile providers, there's a lot of work going on in the background. I think the big one is the customer as well. So I don't mean the end user, but I mean the service providers, the local authority, housing. How ready are they? It's a monumental task they all face in terms of this transition. And I think there's a step back for them all to look at actually what's their strategy around the services they provide, not just in terms of telecare, but maybe more broadly in technology, and what's their plans longer term, and where does actually then telecare and analog fit in that. So it's really easy to go out and buy things. There's lots of us with devices and services to procure, but for me, there's that kind of the first stage is actually what's our own plan, and how do we actually plan to implement this rather than just going out and spending, which I guess leads me on to the question you've kind of put to me in terms of cost piece. Actually, if you just go out and buy, I can't remember who made the point earlier, but effectively, you're almost kind of double the cost. Might be you, Richard, earlier. You know, the digital alarm currently, just on paper, is twice as much. So if you were just going to look at a pure like-for-like swap for most providers, that's a daunting number. Obviously, the bigger the scale, the more daunting that number is. So I think it's about working to understand what your plans are, and then actually engaging with device manufacturers. You know, what are the opportunities to look at a swap out program, an upgrade program? Telecare is still an industry that's learning to move from analog to IP. Lots of other sectors have done that already, where they offer upgrades now. Mobile phones is a really good example. So I think that there's a lot of work to do, and there's a piece of work for industry and customer to look at different procurement models. There's lots of examples out there of different sectors that have got innovative procurement. I think there's a piece of work we need to do with our customer base to look at that and help support that transition. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Sorry, Steve, I was just about to say, it strikes me that the key difference between an analog and a digital device, particularly if you're going down the sort of the LTE GSM route, is that traditionally a local authority housing association could allocate so much money, X amount of money, to buy X amount of analog devices, whether that be individual alarms or sheltered housing upgrade. But that's always been seen quite often as capital spend. You know, I'll put together 50k to one side and that'll do X number of alarms. As you say, a digital alarm is, in simple terms, twice the price. Instead of £100, let's say it's £200. But the real kicker for the commissioner and the real difference is the ongoing recurring charges. And by that, I mean the SIM, so the communication device. But sometimes, depending on manufacturer, there's potentially a platform management fee as well to manage those devices. And as you say, perhaps looking at different models of financing, leasing, etc., may be more appropriate now because of that recurring element. Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, and I think you've touched on it. I think for parking the capital expense on the actual box unit itself, I think the difficulty for then a lot of providers is that on cost. So actually, how much is this now going to cost me on top of the cost of the actual equipment? And I think there is a piece of work to do to get commissioners to commission things differently. There's lots of innovative ways that the transition could be procured and different commercial models. And I welcome obviously conversations with providers who are looking to transition about some of those options that are available. The fact is, if we go down the route of using mobile and using the mobile networks and using SIM cards, there is a cost to it. It's not a free of charge service unless one of the telcos on the call want to offer their SIMs for free. But it's how we manage that with the customer base. And as I said, how we look at doing things maybe differently. Maybe now is the chance as we move on this journey that procurement and commissioning look to move from very traditional models to maybe slightly more innovative models of procurement.
Okay, thank you. Saeed from Legrand, do you have any observations around this pricing impact of moving to digital?
Steve made some very good points around the fact that we need new models of purchasing to help commissioners, and a number of providers, equipment providers, are bundling the upfront costs. So it's either a single cost, that full lifetime cost for 5 years is known to everybody, or there's the kind of leasing or technology as a service approach where you don't actually own the device, but you just are paying for the device and its monitoring. So there's a lot of new challenges that commissioners have to face and get their heads around. But the other thing we've got to bear in mind is that a lot of our service users only have their telephone line, their analog lines in there to support the old analog alarm units. Now, I think as more people are moving from middle age into the kind of sectors that we look after, they don't have the fixed analog lines in the first place. So, putting in a telecare device might actually, an analog telecare device might actually require a phone line to be put in. So there's some advantages as well with the cellular devices. And I think one thing we've also kind of touched on is that when we talk about digital, we've focused on what that means for the network piece, but what it means for the devices is moving away from any tone-based signaling, because it's those tones that will fail over a packet-based network. And so that's the thing we've got to pay attention to. When we talk about telephone line, digital means one thing. When we're talking about telecare equipment, we mean equipment that doesn't use tones. It's natively IP. Have I answered the questions, or I'm kind of?
I think you may have gone off a little bit of a tangent, but all of the information is obviously very, very useful to the audience. But I've got lots of other panelists with hands up. Tony, I was coming to you next in any event, so it's appropriate.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon now. Tony Walk here from Everon. Everon are a company that were headquartered in Finland. So as we've mentioned earlier, we've learned from experience in Finland and both Sweden. So we are a digitally enabled device. We've never signaled analog, and we signal digital now. I think the thing is our specialist area is group living, and a lot of the conversation has been about independent living this morning. But we've taken on the challenge of trying to convince customers to move their group living solutions over to a new digital solution, and taking it back to price. What this delivers is a completely different breakdown of costs. I think as we've mentioned earlier, we're now looking at more of a telecare as a service rather than the large capital expenditure that you get with the traditional group living system. And because you've got a digital system, it allows you to look at the costs differently. So the traditional market, it would be capital expenditure, and then you get a service contract that maintains that equipment for 25 years. With a digital solution, what you get is a solution that's wireless and much easier to install. So you get a lower capital cost, and ongoing. What you do is we're converting that maintenance cost into the service cost to give you the connectivity and the ongoing services that you get with a digital system. And I think we're forgetting the message here that those new systems have the ability to provide a much better service for the individual. We can link to IoT devices, we can link to telehealth devices, and we can provide a much better service for the end user using the digital infrastructure. So it's a much better solution for the end user than the old analog system was.
So if I can just interrupt, Tony. So essentially, I think your proposition is to, if I understand correctly, is within assisted living, within sheltered housing, for instance, it's to install what we would tend to know as dispersed alarm units, but using the digital network, a back-end software application, is to route calls, so as to replicate the traditional functionality of a group system. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. I must move on. Lots of hands.
We lost Steve.
I think you've got to put 50 pence in the meter.
Just on the topic of costs, so I think we can't get away from the fact that there is going to be an ongoing cost that potentially we never had before. Previously, analog alarms using the customer's existing PSTN, it was just a one-off cost for the analog alarm. I think that there's two different things there, though. So there are the different types of procurement models that were mentioned before, maybe sales as a service and something like that. But also there are cost savings or more value to be generated as well, I think. So Ronan mentioned the ability with digital alarms to be able to send out new peripherals to customers and to program them remotely. And I think Ronan mentioned that that's maybe an opportunity to avoid having to go to the site if you don't need to. But it's also a way to generate more value for a customer. So rather than the person that previously would have gone to site to install a smoke alarm, for example, or to replace the batteries in the smoke alarm, they can actually turn that into a proactive visit because they know that they're not having to go there in emergency just to fix something, rather than getting rid of that visit from the customer completely or from the end user completely. that visit to the end user now becomes something that's maybe a welfare visit, and provides a lot more value to the end user than someone just going to replace an alarm, which could be done, like Ronan said, remotely, because you've now got that digital connection. Also, we're now obviously putting IP connectivity into the devices in terms of mobile data, and that will allow us in the future. I've seen it mentioned in the chat about adding different services on top, and I think Tony from Everon mentioned that as well. That once we've got that digital connection in the home, we can start to add stuff like proactive monitoring of different health sensors, or maybe activity monitoring, and start to actually have interventions before the emergency happens. So maybe we don't need to replace, you know, an analog product with a digital product that's just the analog product signaling digitally. Maybe this going forward is our opportunity to actually redesign the service, center that service around individuals, and tailor it a bit more for different people, because we've now got that connectivity in the home that we didn't have before.
Oh, makes sense. Sean?
Yeah, the point was, with regards to moving into digital, it's not replacing everything out in the field in terms of all the peripherals. It is really just the dispersed alarm unit that needs to be replaced, because your existing peripherals will still communicate through that device. So from a commissioner's spend, yes, there is, and I would say, you know, somewhere between 60% to 70% on cost of a dispersed alarm unit over analog. But then looking at equipment, and you look at this with all other industries as well, which telecare lags, is that if you're going to buy something that's going to depreciate over time, which these devices are going to, then rather than purchase, lease. And lease is the way that a lot of other industries have gone with new technology. Because what we're seeing here now is a revolution, but something will come out in the next 5 to 6 years, and there'll be another upgrade as well needed. So my approach with commissioners would be look to switch the model from a capital purchase to a leasing, and let the supplier take the risk, so to speak, with the product rather than yourself. Lost Steve again?
Okay, we seem to have, Steve seems to have frozen, so.
Okay.
So let's pick up on some of the questions that he sent me. The next question comes from Nicola at Cambridgeshire. I said, what's on offer to customers under sorry, I've been given half of Steve's questions.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back. Apologies, Zoom crashed out. So, as I said, my apologies. Sean, the last I heard was you talking. Did you complete what you were talking about? Sean, you're on mute.
Yeah, I did supply and answer the question.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll take a change of direction. This is a question from Alistair Stevenson from the NHS. What is the role of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulator in getting digital solutions approved? Saeed is one of the few with a sort of an R&D background. Is that one you'd like to pick up for me, please?
Yeah, okay, that's a really interesting question. I mean, there's some elements of our products that do fall under that regulation. I mean, things like epilepsy sensors and bedwetting sensors, but the core of our product set doesn't fall under that directive. So from that perspective, I'm not quite sure what help can be provided other than making awareness of the changeover. And also, just noticed some interesting things in the chat where people are talking about IoT sensors, Zigbee, and other elements. I think one thing we have to bear in mind is that there are a set of safety standards around social alarm equipment defined by Senelec and BSI. So that you might have domestic sensors that could be used, but they won't offer the same degree of reliability and safety as the equipment that is classified as social alarms.
So really the very simple answer is these are not medical devices.
Well, we have peripherals that do fall under the scope of medical devices, but they are particular peripherals in particular telecare use cases. But the core button in a box doesn't.
Okay. What would be examples of the ones that do say fall into that?
Epilepsy sensor, for example.
Okay. No, that's good. Okay, thank you for that. I think it's a fairly straightforward one. If I may stick with you, actually, there's quite a roll on in terms of the next question, which is from Deborah again at Lancashire County Council. And the question is, and I'll come back to the mobile guys in a second, but are LP1 and LoRaWAN feasible alternatives to costly SIM cards in digital telecare hubs? So
the actual,
which is low power.
I was going to say, one of the things that makes a social alarm is the two-way speech path that has to be put in place with the service user. The low bandwidth technologies such as LoRaWAN don't support speech. I mean, they're great for alerting and sending telemetry information and may be capturing daily living, but you can't create a speech path. So where it does come into place, you might have a hybrid device that uses, say, LoRaWAN sensors and information, but also has a GSM or voice over IP speech path as well. But again, you're then having two different technologies in a single device, which would actually increase cost rather than making a.
Okay, so they'll probably be quite good for things like activities of daily living, you know, where it's very small data rates.
Yeah, absolutely perfect for those.
Yeah, and if in my understanding, they're used for things like bus stop, you know, when's the bus going to come along? So it's very small bits of data. But as you say, it would be my understanding as well that speech requires a broader bandwidth than is provided by these services. But Max, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so the only thing I would say on that is I think that LTE Cat-M will potentially in the future have a role to play in telecare. So LTE Cat-M does support voice, or will support voice over LTE. The problem that we've got today is that the network infrastructure doesn't exist. So we need to make this change now, and there isn't currently the low power wide area network sort of footprint, certainly in the UK. So from a Cat-M perspective, there's only O2, and only on the base stations that they themselves control, because they share base station masts with Vodafone. So there's an O2 network in half of the country, and then NB-IoT is sort of the opposite in that Vodafone have got an NB-IoT network. But again, with the types of devices obviously that we're using, it's important to have that roaming capability so that if something goes wrong on the local network, you're able to connect to a different network. But I do think that in the future, certainly for things like trackers, Cat-M probably will be the answer going forward. Not so much because of the low cost and stuff like that, but more the battery power. Obviously, we've got sort of a demographic that maybe won't necessarily be charging their devices every night. And LTE Cat-M will give us that option to have that, and it will support voice and does support handover of base stations as well, which is another issue that I think NB-IoT has, in that you can't, with a stable connection, switch from one base station to another. You have to drop the connection to then move to a different base station, whereas LTE-M does still handover.
Okay, so it's more seamless in its action. Douglas, I think you've got some observations as well.
Thanks, Steve. So I'll just, Max is absolutely right. Cat-1M is an excellent solution for the future, but not for now. In terms of LoRaWAN, it's using technology that's appropriate. So if perhaps you've got a LoRaWAN network around a local centre, but you would still want to use mobile as your exit point to other locations. You can use LoRaWAN for very wide area, but you then come across lots of problems. The big advantage that it has is it's low power. So I would say it's a mix of technologies. What you want to see is perhaps Zigbee or LoRaWAN for local networks using low power battery power, so you don't have to recharge. But you're probably still going to use mobile now as the exit point to other locations, and then as Max said, in the future, perhaps Cat 1M when the operators have finally got national coverage for it.
Okay, and Zigbee is a term that is starting to be bounced around the market now. For those on the call that are not familiar with some of these radio protocols, could you perhaps just pick one or two off, Douglas?
Yeah, sure.
To explain what they are and the terms that professional commissioners may come across when they're looking at alarm devices.
So Zigbee is actually quite an old standard. I was selling it 20 years ago, but these things take a long time to come to fruition. But it's basically a way of sending data, low amounts of data through a robust self-healing network. So the lampposts talk to each other using Zigbee. It's a well-established technology. You can buy Zigbee doorbells. So it's a nice way of daisy chaining. Each node in a Zigbee system passes data to another. But it's local, it's low power, and it's small amounts of data. And again, to pick up the point from various contributors, there's no voice component in it.
Okay, no, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next question. We've covered this one off a little bit, but I still want to come back to it. It's from Adam Fay at Riverside. I think it might be Riverside Housing. And the question is, network providers have assured telecare providers pre-transition that no client will be left vulnerable as services are migrated to digital. In his experience, this isn't the case, and he has a number of examples where customers have been left high and dry, older customers. I appreciate somebody's had to pop off, but perhaps David Christie, again, any observations on this, David? And just perhaps as a supplementary question from me, where a new IP service has gone into an older person's home where they have an alarm device, my understanding is there will be an analog to digital port, a voice port to plug in the analog alarm device that's already in the property. Have we got any experience of how reliable that is working? And how can we avoid a position where a service is upgraded and then an elderly person is left completely vulnerable because their alarm device no longer works?
Yeah, I'll be having words with Sodi about leaving early separately, but no, happy to pick that one up. So I think that there is a big challenge here. So if you look at the example of where we are migrating the technology in a particular switch, everybody on that switch will be affected, irrespective of whether they are a regular telephone user with no special needs or a vulnerable user with a telehealth device. So that the key thing is communication, setting out clearly what is going to happen, and in particularly with the communications, loud and clear, do you have any telehealth devices? If you do, get in touch with us and we can support you. Ultimately, where we have what we need to do is try and reach every single customer on that switch. Now, as we know, writing out to customers it doesn't always work. People won't get back in touch. So you try and use as many ways as possible of getting in touch. So there's SMS, where we have a mobile number, tends to be quite good because it pops up on your mobile and you get an instant reaction. We know not all people have mobiles, or maybe just keep mobiles for emergency uses, especially in the older demographic. Email, again, maybe not great for older people, but it's another way of doing it. And we also have door knocks as well, where engineers in the area will try and go and call on unresponsive customers who aren't telling us whether they have any special needs. So ultimately, all of that is a process. We're doing as much as we can. Now, the migration will have to go ahead. We can't keep the technology going where migration happens. So there is a chance, therefore, that somebody who doesn't respond, doesn't tell us that they have a telehealth device or is vulnerable, we can't support them. We leave contact numbers open. They can get back in touch with us. We can get rapid restoration, get engineers out to get them back up and running as soon as possible. And as part of the communication as well, especially for telehealth users, is the service that you are migrating to going to be suitable? So again, we've got information that goes out to these customers to make sure if in their particular circumstances, they feel they are better off moving to BT, even if Sodhu's not on the call, moving to TalkTalk, moving to Sky, whoever, then that's an option for them to get them in the best position post-migration for their particular needs. Communication is key. And, you know, the risk of people slipping through the net, we want to minimize that as much as possible. So that's communication with the customers, but also we do want to have the wider communication with those stakeholders who support those customers, so local authorities and the like. And I think where we've had feedback in terms of our new customer sales, so this is not a migration. This is somebody who maybe is with BT at the moment. They decide they want to switch their telephone service and broadband to Virgin. They'll phone us up. New sale, we'll provide them with an IP voice line rather than a PSTN voice line. Again, going through all of that important information at point of sale. Do you have a telecare device? That's an explicit question. If you do, these are the important things you need to know. It might not be the right thing for you to do. Stay with BT if that's better for you. That's the sort of messaging. But if they go through, click all the wrong buttons and end up with something that doesn't suit them, again, trying to support them post-event. And we will, if an engineer goes into a premises and finds a telehealth device there, we should be leaving a card with the customer to say, we've tried our best to help you to plug it in to make sure it works, but you need to speak to your service provider because it's not our technology. It's not a Virgin Media box. So there's a limitation to the knowledge of our engineers. So yes, I think it's a great question. If there are instances where things have gone wrong, let us know as soon as possible. We've got our IP voice at virginmedia.co.uk email dedicated to this, so you don't have to phone up customer services. That's probably a good route in for stakeholders such as local authorities. But yes, try and minimize the risk and then pick up anything that does slip through.
Okay, thank you for that. Michael, I believe you have an observation.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. I work in NHS X, which is in broad terms, which is the digital part of the Department of Health and Social Care, and my sort of focus is as sort of part of that, it is around social care and sort of covering England nationally. I think with DCMS not sort of having a national awareness campaign, I think it falls on individual parts of government to sort of work with stakeholders to sort of make sure that sort of different sectors are aware, and I've really found the sort of discussions helpful today, especially around what is the impact on vulnerable people, what's the impact on local authorities, who sort of knows what, and clearly just sort of following on from David's observations there, different parts of the sector have got good sort of plans that they were wanting to put in place, and I think it's ensuring that sort of everyone is aware of sort of what's happening. So in NHSX we have just started a piece of work which is around that sort of awareness aspect. So we're working with the local government association on this, and we're working with a sort of telecoms consultant, Farpoint, and we'll be doing interviews and surveys with sort of telecare providers, suppliers, services, and also playing in the very, very much local authorities and their role in sort of those sort of services, and the voluntary sector and users and their families as well. And our sort of aim is to put together a report on sort of what the current level of awareness, planning and sort of preparedness is what and I think as well what the sort of challenges are, but also what the opportunities are in this area, which some of the panel have talked about, and it's been highlighted in the chat as well. And our aim then is to issue that report and guidance and awareness guidance and some comms early in the new year, so that the sort of all sort of interested parties have more of an awareness in the round of what's happening, what they can expect. So I'm also talking about local authorities, users, housing associations, voluntary sector, care service suppliers and providers, but to sort of have that to sort of have those guidelines issued in the new year. And I think because I think that's important, because I think I've heard some really interesting things today, but it's bringing those together so that people have an awareness of sort of what is happening in the round. So I know that sort of after this event, there'll sort of be some information going out, and my sort of contact details will be part of that, but also if you are in a local authority or if you are a service provider, supplier, you sort of should be hearing from us as well in sort of terms of the questionnaires and interviews. But as I say, I'll ensure that sort of people on the call know sort of more about me and our role, and as I say, our sort of focus on sort of trying to improve the awareness in the parts of the sector that sort of that sort of this is only be sort of getting to filter through, that there is this change. Some local authorities, from my experience, are sort of very much on the ball. Others aren't at the moment.
Michael, just while we've got you on, and I think we're probably all a little bit intrigued as to NHSX and how the NHS as a whole is viewing the application of technology remotely to support people in the community. And as a sector, we've been trying to pull the NHS into our world of telecare and telehealth, and without, I think, fair to say, without much success over the last sort of 10 or 15 years. But I am encouraged that, healthcare commissioners are starting to see a place for the use of telehealth technology, perhaps driven in part, at least, by COVID. Do you have any observations around that yourself at all?
Well, in sort of terms of NHSX and our role around sort of digital use and sort of also about how that digital use creates data for sort of planning and service provision, etc. Yes, there has been, the last 18 months has seen, sort of great sort of leaps forward in sort of terms of the sort of health service using digital approaches. Social care, of course, at the moment, only about 30% of social care is digitalized, and I think that is very, very much part of our work in terms of planning, of training for the social care sector, and the use of tools like a social care record that sort of is digitalized, which sort of can be updated in real time. It can be accessed by sort of health services, and information from health services can be put into the sort of that sort of idea, that the social care record. And then when a person goes into different care settings, that information is there. So I see a very, very exciting time for social care going forward, as part of the wider social care reforms. But I think as well there sort of is a need for sort of more joining up in terms of the switch over. There sort of are other people who have an interest in sort of health, and I know some of the telecom providers, of course, are sort of engaging at a slightly higher scale with the large hospitals, etc. But I think you know, certainly I think as the work on the sort of telecare provider side, supplier awareness moves forward, I think that's an opportunity for me and others to sort of link up more on sort of what is happening, you know, on a health perspective, but sort of also across the United Kingdom as well, because different parts of the United Kingdom might be doing different things and might have different approaches which sort of can be shared.
So certainly, I think what would be really great from an industry perspective, I think, and hopefully I'm talking on behalf of those organisations operating alarm receiving centres, is some form of access to that health and social care data, so that when the alarm receiving centre takes an emergency call from a service user, that perhaps can be in a position to have much more data available and therefore be able to influence the emergency services, an ambulance or whatever, to have a much clearer picture of what they're walking into. You know, if somebody has just come out of hospital because they've had a heart operation, you know, typically now an alarm receiving centre operating within the sector wouldn't know that. But if they did know that and they could pass that on to the ambulance, then clearly they're going to take a different priority if somebody's complaining about chest pains, perhaps, than would otherwise be the case. But I'm very conscious of time. We're down to the sort of last 15 minutes or so. So thank you very much, Michael. I'm going to come back to the equipment service providers, because Carol Ferguson of Lambeth Council has asked, again, a broad question, but a really interesting one, which is, could you suggest risk mitigation actions in managing transition from analog to digital? In other words, how can we mitigate as a sector any risk associated with that? Richard Bailey, perhaps if you feel comfortable kicking off, any thoughts you have on that one?
Yeah, we've got a number of, we've done some presentations, and one of the, I think somebody mentioned it earlier on, one of the big issues is that power to the router. What happens if Mrs. Smith at night time goes round and switches a router off? If you provide that person with a GSM unit, you know, a fixed line, well, take a step back. So Telealarm will provide either an Ethernet, so you plug it into the router, and an analog connection for current use, or the sort of hybrid, which would be analog fixed line plugged into your router and then a GSM. So we'd recommend for those people, you're probably not going to be able to teach them not to switch things off at night time. What you can do is you can report from your monitoring centre to find out who switches their units off at night time. They're the people that you really need to be providing the full GSM units. Others, if you look at the average power failures in the area, so you can look online, the national power providers, there's statistics that say it's around about an hour. Now, if you look at, it's a grey area, because if you compare power failures, like the further that power failure goes, so if you've got a power failure in your home, you've lost the power to the router. But if you lose the power to the street, the fibre cabinet has a power battery backup of, I think, around 4 to 6 hours. So if you're providing a battery backup in the home, you know, you have a generator or whatever that's running forever, the green cabinet's only got a battery backup in there. So that has to be in consideration. The further out you go, the mast for the GSM signal might not have a battery backup in it. And if it does, that battery backup might only be 30 minutes. So depending on the severity of this power failure, you might end up with nothing. So, yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine.
It's a very difficult one to look at, but there are certain things that can be done. One of them is a UPS or some sort of battery backup. We know that BT are providing those for the property. Putting a GSM unit in where you've got vulnerable people. Some areas there is no mobile signal, so they're going to have to put something in, and having a fixed line only device so that just plugs into the router is better than not providing anything at all.
Is it perhaps a useful thing for a local authority or a housing association to do, is if they have a large analog estate, and recognizing what the CPs are saying in terms of the fairly ad hoc approach to upgrading, and I'm probably being unfair in using that term, but to have a number of radio devices in stock, GSM LTE devices, that if they come across a customer that's been unexpectedly upgraded, they can basically pop a device, because it's wireless, there's very little to do, but it will pop a device straight into that property. So, you know, holding half a dozen or a dozen devices ready to be deployed if an analog service has been upgraded unexpectedly. Might that make sense?
It would. I mean, it's same as the sort of hospital discharge over COVID. You know, you've got a load of GSM units that are plugged and programmed with an ID number, and they're ready to go. And if some, you know, in an emergency, those can be replaced. Definitely, yeah.
Michael, got a thought on that? Michael, can you hear me? Oh, yeah.
Hi, Steve. Thank you. I think I think it's these sort of issues, I think need to be explored. I think, and I think that all I'd say at the moment is I'm sure the work that sort of we are about to do will sort of bring these sort of types of issues out and allow sort of a fuller discussion of them.
Okay, thank you. Sean?
I'll just go back to the, in trying to mitigate as much risk as possible, go back to the Swedish experience and just learn from what painfully they went through themselves. In that it is about 4G, or it's about cellular connectivity. It's about roaming SIMs from established partners. And it's about doing the preparation work as well with regards to integrating the product into the contact center that you're going to link to. So it's really for us as manufacturers, suppliers, to do that work in the background so that when we move forward with a solution, it's been tried and tested.
Okay, thank you. And Tony?
Yeah, I'd echo what Sean said, but for us, it's much simpler. So we build the battery back up into the device, and we don't wait for a report to generate to say that there's been power connected, because the device is cellular and it's always on. Then an alert is raised at the point that power's lost. So you can react instantly if there is an issue.
Okay, thank you. And Steve Tope?
Yeah, just one quick sort of observation, and most of the guys have touched on the points, would be to my earlier point about the provider themselves and their own planning. So they're going to have different use cases, and there are obviously different call methods that can be used, whether you're connecting with a SIM, whether you're using fixed lines or Ethernet. I would just say make sure you've got a test plan, make sure you test those scenarios out. What you don't want to do is only have one kind of, I would say, deployment model tested and then suddenly realise there's an issue and you've got to deploy an alternative way and not have that tested beforehand. So again, maybe I know there is an end date, and actually it's only an end date and the world's moving around us right now. But it is to maybe just pause and think about how you're going to deploy transition and make sure you've got a proper plan, which includes the testing in place as well.
No, I think that's all very, very sensible and good stuff. And I think, Steve, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of all the equipment providers, if people have a lack of clarity, if they want some advice on this, I presume you guys would be very happy to take calls from customers to provide advice around contingency planning, etc.
Yeah, and I would say that agnostic of any devices either. We've got obviously customers who buy from a range of vendors. I think it's important. People like yourselves as well, Steve, are out there actually talking about how to help organisations transition successfully. Make sure that we don't leave service users vulnerable. Not thought about. So yeah, anything we can do to have that kind of conversation and support that planning exercise, very, very happy to do so.
Okay, I'd like to stick with you if I may, Steve. but you know, we've got 5 minutes left, 4 minutes, click. And there's one question I'd like to get in, because it's quite pertinent, and we're all reading about shortages in the news, from containers, CO2, gas. Every day there seems to be a new shortage at the moment. And it's a question from Dr. Kevin Dougherty at University of Cumbria, but others have asked this as well, which is broadly, will component shortages and transport issues impact the supplier sector in terms of the delivery of telecare devices? You know, I personally have come across, you know, things like 2 years wait for crystal oscillators, microprocessors on long lead times, shortages of containers getting equipment from the Far East, which is where clearly a lot of equipment is based. I'll do the sort of a last round robin, but any off the top observations from yourself, Steve?
Well, it's well publicised. It's not just the telecare sector. I think it's manufacturing full stop across a whole range of industries. Everything obviously is it's like dominoes. One goes and then the whole chain is impacted. I think all the current telecare manufacturers are impacted to lesser or greater degree, depending on maybe the supply chains they've already got in place, maybe just the volumes of product that they produce. I think it's something that we've got to work better with the customer base with, to try and help them help us manage demand and expectation, so that we are supporting them right now, but also trying to kind of preempt a number of those conversations where people have said, look, we're backloading effectively our transition or the switch over or the switch off. What we don't need then is, from a manufacturing perspective, whilst it's nice maybe to be suddenly inundated with businesses not being able to fulfill that. So again, it's part of that planning. What is the plan of the local authority, the housing provider, service provider, and how do we help them navigate as well as all the technical complexity, but make sure that there's a supply assurance to it as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. Sean, any observations on that from yourself?
No, Steve's right on this. Really, you know, it comes down to our customers, commissioners, recognizing that, you know, we are part of a global system where there's demand coming from different industries. If they can help us by providing those forecasts, we can work with our suppliers to book that space rather than knee-jerk into it, which is where we're going to find the problems. So it's a concerted effort all around. We'll play our part with this, but we can't expect to pull a rabbit out of the hat at the last minute when somebody comes in and says, I want to change my whole estate over the next 3 months. I need 8,000 devices. So,
no, that's great, Sean. And thank you. And I think my observation would be, this is not supplier specific. It is a generic industry issue. And I think that the message from you, Sean, and I'm sure it'd be reflected by the other device suppliers, which is, don't keep putting things off. Don't leave it to the last minute, because if you do, we may disappoint as an industry, because we may not physically be able to get the devices to manufacture the goods. And quite frankly, yeah, and I'm really thinking here around assisted living, there may not be the physical installation capability if we backload all of that to the end of the program as well. Just a quick one in terms of David Christie. Any difficulties from your side in terms of device and equipment procurement?
Not currently. Obviously, that relates to routers. So the vast majority of our customers have IP voice compatible routers already, even though they're taking analog voice products. So the vast majority would be able to be use their existing equipment to be put on there. So from that perspective, great. But again, I agree for this reason and for the other reasons that we've already said, don't backload, plan ahead, get in now, because as more and more people migrate over, there potentially will be more and more knee-jerk reactions needed to get those people into a good space. So if we do it earlier, the better it is.
Excellent. And just sticking with you for the very last observation or question, simply because quite a few people have raised this on the chat line, is about routers and battery backup. My understanding, and forgive me if I'm wrong, is that the services provided by the CPs we're going to have about a 1 hour battery backup on the routing of the router device. Is that correct? And is that expandable, presumably at an additional cost, if commissioners require that?
So the 1 hour thing is from Ofcom guidance. So it's not what's necessarily out there in practice. Each CP has to provide a battery backup to its vulnerable customers in order for those customers to at least make a voice call to emergency services. And that length of that battery backup is from 1 hour. So that's the minimum. So you can, of course, go beyond that. So we've got a cellular-based backup, which provides longer than an hour's backup, but it has other limitations in terms of number ranges that can be called. And obviously, we can't service customers who are in not spots, an issue that's been raised on the chat before. So those are the customers, for example, we'd have to point to another provider, to a BT, to a TalkTalk, to a Sky, for example. So what you need to understand is there is no standard battery backup for across the industry. You'll need to understand BT's battery backup, Virgin Media's battery backup, TalkTalk's battery backup, Sky's battery backup, etc., etc. Now, I'm sure that's not the ideal solution that whatever everyone wants to hear. But again, it's about understanding the issue, getting on board with it early, knowing which provider your customers are using, and all of that. If we can get as much information across both sides of the divide, we will be collectively in a better position to serve our end users, our collective end users.
Okay, no, that's good. John Livermore, last word to yourself. Any observations on this battery backup? I appreciate you're not a CP as such, but any observations around this area?
As you say, Openreach don't provide battery backup because they don't provide routers, so it is more of a CP question. But I guess just going on from what David said, and everything David said was correct. Just remember that directive is aimed at making blue light service calls. It's not for telecare, so that's something that you need to think about. It may well be that the CP decides that all their vulnerable customers get it no matter what. It may well be that they pull up those that are telecare. I don't think they will, but it's a possibility. The other thing to remember is that every CP keeps their own vulnerable list. And if a customer has never contacted them to say, hey, I'm vulnerable because of this, this, and this, they may not be on that list. So remember, those lists will be particular to each CP, and each one will have their own set of criteria for that. So don't automatically assume that battery backup's coming your way.
So there is no statutory requirement to provide that battery backup, no legislation requiring you to do that?
I believe it's in the 2018 Power Emergency Services document, which I've got a copy of, which was an Ofcom, I think, advice directive. I could call it what you will, but actually it does say, as David said, it's a 1 hour minimum, must be provided by CPs to do that. However, there's this issue again about what does vulnerable mean? And no one in the industry really has tackled, I guess, what it means for everybody, and everyone signed up to this one charter. It is down to interpretation for each individual, how they do that. And again, as David said, there will be different router backups. Generally, the 12 volts. That doesn't necessarily follow through for all of them. The other thing to remember, really final point for me from Openreach perspective, is if you're moved to FTTP, your ONT, which replaces the master socket, also will require a battery backup. So potentially you might need to be asking for 2.
Okay, but there is no duty on the CP to provide that. And if they do, that may be at an additional cost.
Well, within the 1 hour bracket. So as I said, it does say clearly 1 hour, but the definition of vulnerable is up for debate, I guess.
So there's an opportunity for the CPs to step forward and provide a market leading proposition by increasing that. I could see that would be very attractive to the telecare sector. Putting it bluntly, if one was providing 6 hours battery backup and another was providing the bare 1 hour minimum. So I guess I'll leave that as a thought hanging in the air for the CPs to see if they want to try and generate a competitive edge. But we're out of time. We're 5 minutes over, actually. So I'd like to thank all the panelists. Forgive me if I didn't get round to all the panelists or didn't include some more than others. I've tried to include people with the skills relative to the questions that were asked. Thank you, everybody, for doing the questions online. Clearly, I haven't been able to get round all those, but we'll try and save those for the next session. And I'm sure there'll be another one in the next couple of months or so. And more importantly than anything else, thank you for all the people attending this session. And hopefully, what's the adage? A problem shared is a problem halved. Well, hopefully, any problems we may have been put a little bit more into context. And hopefully there's the odd snippet or the little piece of advice or recommendation that you can take away from this, that you can build and help with your service providers. So thank you very much for your time, everybody. And if I may, back to yourself, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for covering the event so comprehensively. On behalf of UK Telehealthcare, I would like to thank all the panelists as well. Just to remind all the delegates that the recording of this event will be available online. Also, any questions we haven't covered, we will go back and we will aim them to the panelists. We will also look at this as not an end point, but a starting point to how we support the industry over the next 3 years. So I know Michael talked a little bit about their project and how they're looking to support the service providers and working together with suppliers. And we very much want to be part of that. We have the website with a lot of information and signposting. We will continue to run the virtual events. When we go back to physical events in the new year, hopefully we'll be able to look at how we will run events around the all IP situation and support the industry going forward. Our next event is on Tuesday the 28th, so next Tuesday. A different theme, we're looking around the falls industry and how techs could support that. So we hope you'll be able to join us then. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you again, Steve. And we look forward to seeing you on Tuesday the 28th. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the opportunity.